Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be joining us from. My name is Devin Morgan, Director of Baseball at Driveline, founder of the Driveline Academy, and this is Driveline Academy Podcast, world's most dangerous youth baseball podcast. I am joined, as per usual, by my brother, my partner, my assistant director, building this thing with me brick by brick, Jeremy Techteal. First of all, how are your legs feeling today?
Not great. I'm a second-day soreness guy, so tomorrow is going to be worse. I can tell you that.
Jeremy caught 5 innings yesterday, and then threw six innings behind the dish, and then so we did the same thing to you that we tell people not to do to their kids.
Yeah. Luckily, I was not wearing a pulse, so God knows what my workload was like yesterday because I threw 5 innings of a simulated game. To afterwards.
Yeah.
So it was a long 4 hours.
And
my body feels it, but
good on you because being able to put on the gear and catch while we had kids doing live ABs meant that we didn't have to worry about their workloads. So we basically you paid the toll for everybody.
And I'd do it again.
Yeah, it bees like that sometimes. So we're gonna do today's episode in a relatively brief fashion. So this is probably gonna be like 40 minutes or less at most. And I don't know that we're going to get all the way into it, but I wanted to talk about sportsmanship because there were a couple videos over the last week or so that very much got traction heavy in the baseball social media ecosystem. And it's funny, when I start to see stuff that comes from one account that might be known for a bunch of MLB stuff, and then another account that's known for high school stuff, and another account that's known for college only stuff. And then there's the skill split in between that. And when you see the same content get pushed by a lot of those same kind of accounts, it tells you that something's got some wheels, right? Yeah. So there's 2 videos that I kind of want to talk out to kind of set the stage for this conversation about sportsmanship. In the first one, let me see if I can do this correctly. Anthony Brady, be proud of me. Okay, so you're not going to hear Jeremy and I talking through this video when we recorded the episode because we lost the audio, but I'll go ahead and give you the narration here. So a right-handed hitter, view is kind of looking down the third base line. Kid hits an absolute tank, left center gap, grand slam in his final at-bat, ejects the bat in the direction of his dugout. Just full on Goose in Top Gun, just sends that thing over there. And then once he's done with that, he's going to take a quick peek into the opposing team's dugout and make sure with a couple of exaltations that they know that he's the man, and then begins the slow saunter around the bases. And that is the thrilling recap of the video that we watched on the podcast with this audio to replace it. So, yeah, and
he does a little Tatis around third there.
Yeah, sure. And, teammates have a little hip gyration, at the dish, a little chirp a little bit back at the first base dugout, right?
And that is clearly not his dugout as they all walk back to the third base dugout.
Yeah. So there's that. And I'll give it up. Matt Pierce, who I believe is out of Texas, does a lot of hitting work and coaches for the Sliders organization down there. Matt to me had the best take about all this, because when something like this starts getting traction, there's a lot of, I can just, we can dip into the quote tweets, right? And I'm sure that we're gonna see just
Did they drill someone?
Yeah, such a loser sport, blah, blah, blah. It's just it's a lot of... it's the stuff that's going to be at the top is going to be, largely kids on Twitter who are hey, boomers, relax. But Matt's position on this was pretty great. He was just look, man, this is a high school kid. We don't know the clues or the context. We don't know what was said to them. We don't know, and this is the thing that I think Matt hits on, is we don't know if he regrets it. And then Matt calls out, he's like either way, this is a teachable moment.
Yeah.
And it's funny because to me, the interesting thing is when did the Let the Kids Play MLB campaign come out? That was 2016, 17-ish. Feels like
it might have been 17.
Okay, so legitimately 5 years from now, right? Or 5 years previous, my bad. I've seen people that are like, well, all this stuff has been, it's all MLB's fault because that let the kids play, right? And they'll literally like disparage that as that's like the calling card to go like, well, it's an indictment on like this whole approach to the game, right? Yeah. That launch angle can be blamed on this, velocity and strikeouts going up can be blamed on this, and certainly like this aspect of things, sportsmanship, team culture, approach to the game, right? This is the well, these kids don't know how to play for the team anymore, and all they do is play for themselves, and basically it's MLB's fault for putting out the Let the Kids Play campaign, and that's the genesis of it. And it's like, boy, do I have news for you about the history of our sport. I'm not sure where you might sit on the side of did Babe Ruth call his shot or not. But if that's really a thing that he did, and he wasn't just like pointing to something down the line, what's the difference between that and this, right? Like, the Carlton Fisk, trying to wish it fair. We didn't invent bat flipping was not invented in 2017. Carl Yastrzemski has a famous bat flip, right? Like this stuff has been going on for a long time. So, the pushback to say, well, these kids don't know how to play the game nowadays. And this is kind of the best point of that, to me, feels we're being like conveniently short-sighted about the history of our game. Because what we do know that's taken place since 2017 is there have been way more video captured because the task of capturing video got way easier, yep. Right? This stuff has been happening in the 80s, 70s, 60s, 50s, 40s, 30s, 20s. Like our game is a competitive sport, right? And guys are going to chirp and pop off.
They used to actually fight.
Yeah, yeah, like for real, And now, what we do see though is because the task of recording your child in baseball is not, let me strap on like a 20-pound video camera and then purchase like this array of physical media that I have to record it on and then lug that crap to the field and then record and maybe just catch some stuff. It's like, it
was wild last night being at the 18U game. Every time a kid came up, you knew who his parents were because They immediately stood up and pulled out their phones, were taking camera of the kids at bat. And it was
it's like it's a 5.5 by 3 by 1/2 inch camera that's in your pocket all the time. And if you buy the right one, or you just have your storage going into the cloud, you can record infinite things. So we have that, and we also have social media acting as like this gigantic distribution network. So up front, I very much disagree with the idea that like this is all like a new thing.
Yeah, 100%.
It
is not a new thing.
Our ability to capture it is very different than it used to be.
Sure.
But the other thing I want to kind of connect to is like the second video, and I didn't have it queued up, and I actually texted my son because he's the one that showed it to me, and believe it or not, he's in school and isn't on his cell phone.
I was just going to say, if he answers, it's not a great thing.
He didn't reply to me to figure out the account, so you'll just have to suffer through my my descriptive of it. So it's shot from like second base, and it's a dad and a very young kid, dirt field all by themselves. Kids swinging like a plastic bat. And the kid throws in a couple, and like it's very clear that like the child at this point has kind of decided that the structured nature of today's activities is something I no longer want to participate in. And the kid is probably like 5 or 6 years old, like super tiny, right? And what the kid really wants to do is like, it's Jedi nighttime, and I want to swing the bat around like it's a lightsaber, right? Sure. So kid's doing that at home plate as dad starts to approach. You have an idea where this is going to end, right?
On America's Funniest Home Videos.
Yeah, exactly. Bob Saget should be there. So, the kid's swinging the bat around, and the dad keeps walking up to him, and the dad gets cracked in the face, and then immediately the kid...
face?
Yeah, got him.
That's a high launch angle right there.
Yeah, got him in the grill, and then the dad is, immediately like you do the dad thing where the tone switches, right? Yeah. And it's one of those things where like as a parent, your kids will say to you like, well, why are you yelling at me? And it's like, I'm not actually yelling, but my tone suggests, that thing. So then the kid... because they're a kid, is immediately like emotional and starts crying because they did the wrong thing. And the dad kind of wears him out for it a little bit. I'm sure for the duration that it took to feel like, oh crap, that really hurt. And then he starts to console the kid, right? And I'm not bringing that up to suggest in any way, shape, or form that like I parent from some high and mighty position where I would never get that wrong, right? And I would always get it right. I've been hit by bats, by balls, by Legos, by trucks, any number of different things that were thrown or swung at me without really like any sense of the intentional consequences. And I certainly probably reacted some of those times the same way that dad did in the video. The point that I'm trying to make, though, is that 18-year-old kid in his last high school at-bat hitting a granny. This 5 to 6-year-old kid accidentally hitting his dad in the face. We're talking about kids who are put out for the public in some of their not best behavior or best choices. And the weird thing is that like that same media is also consumed by our kids. So then, whether it's this type of stuff or they see guys in the show that like, they do like the Lance Lynn K-strut, right? Or say some of the things that Lance might say while he's on the bump competing.
Or I think the most common one, swording someone.
The sword has
gotten a little away from us at this point. But
it has. And, between that and the bat flips and kids hitting the gritty as they are going around the bags or coming in to score or, coming off the field, there's this sense from, I think, a lot of older people, and I'll put myself in that group squarely, that look at that stuff and they go like, oh, what's the meme? Every day we fall further from God's grace, right? Like it's viewed as kind of like this example of the, societal crumble.
Sure.
And I would just offer that I think it's an indication of change as a result of distribution of information. Because if kids look up to their favorite baseball player and their favorite baseball player succeeds in a huge moment and they have a celebration, that child is going to think about that in advance of their next big moment, right? So like, one of my favorites is like the Yasiel Puig homer against the Red Sox with like Kobe Bryant in the background, right? Puig hits the tank, the arms fly up, right? Big moment in professional baseball. Kids don't really differentiate between like the stakes of like, the World Series and the stakes of the 12U, Jiffy Lube, International Secretary's Day, quadruple,
bring it home,
quadruple opal, interstellar, elite, galactic championship.
Interstellar and Galactic might be a little redundant, but that's one of my favorite parts of the podcast. It's pulling out the new names for.
I need to like prep those better, right? But like the kids can't differentiate.
ChatGPT could probably come up with a list of like 500 ridiculous names.
Yeah, Gary Paul Thomas could probably help me out there.
Yeah.
The kids don't differentiate between like the scale of that moment for a professional athlete at the highest level of consequence and competition and their moment.
Yep.
Right. So we see on fields kids who have moments of success and they celebrate themselves. And it's such a tough thing to like criminalize that because of how flippin' hard our game is, it's like I think we talked on the last pod that you and I just did about one of the pitchers on your team who, was, I would say inconsistent on the bump and then went out and shoved, CG, no runs scored, one hit given up, and like 8 or 10 punches or whatever, and looked dominant.
11 and 11 walks. Yeah.
And I think at one point in that game, he had himself a little, I don't know if he did a sword or something like that. He had a little celebration.
He sorted someone. Yeah.
And it's like, I don't know.
I think half of my pitchers have sorted someone at some point this year.
Yeah. So for me, putting on my parent hat, when I've talked to my kids about this, it's largely been from a standpoint of like, okay, there's a child on the other end of the equation. If you were the one that gave up that dinger, right? Or if you were the one who got sorted, how do you want your competitor to make you feel? So it's like I kind of see both sides, like I'm not trying to straddle the fence here. I see the reality of it from both sides, right? Kids want to celebrate themselves. They certainly are going to want to do that stuff even more so if they're like behavior modeling off of legitimate hard fought celebrations in college and professional baseball. But the tough part is like, how do you message the nuance to it,
Yeah, 100%. And, I think I actually fall more in the camp of, I'm not that old, but like, I'm the guy who, like, you hit an absolute tank in a huge situation. I think it's way cooler if you just, like, don't even react.
Yeah.
Like, you just put the bat down, like, yeah, I knew that was going to happen.
Yeah,
like,
this is the Barry Sanders.
Yeah.
I'm just going to drop this because
Because I am better than you, and I know.
I've been here before. Act like you've been here before.
Yeah, but,
right?
like, it's not like I don't love celebrations or bat flips or anything. And I want to encourage, I don't watch a lot of youth soccer. I don't watch a lot of soccer. But like I know, they score a goal and it is a non-zero amount of times they take their shirts off.
Oh, sure.
And they're just like running around whipping their
Yeah.
And I don't know, I'm not in soccer discourse. I don't know if people complain about that. Gotta believe you're at 12U soccer game, they're not ripping their shirts off running around the field when they could be. I don't know. Basketball, football, basketball, the amount of, and like I truly love Steph Curry.
Yeah.
But like watching youth basketball highlights where the kids are like,
yeah,
it's just like ridiculous, know? Or like football, like you sack someone and like you do a little dance or whatever. And like, we want them, if we want them to like watch sports and mimic a lot of the behavior they're seeing,
right,
in terms of skill development, it's really hard to separate. Okay, we'll mimic this, but not that.
How do you draw that line?
Right.
Right. How do you draw that line? And especially from MLB standpoint, where it was like, with the let the kids play, right? It's like Mike Trout is like the best player we've had. We know he's like the quiet guy. So like, I'm also going to shine like, well, I'm going to like prod him a little bit to trash talk a little bit. And then Stanton's going to say something and Lindor's going to say something. Like, how does a child understand how to differentiate between which one of those things is the right thing to do?
Right. And what I find oftentimes is kids, like most humans, much better at dishing it out than taking it.
Oh yeah.
So we had some issues last year with like celebrating and then getting very, for lack of a better term, butthurt when the other team would celebrate to us. Like right back, right?
Posteriorly affected.
Yeah, just like really in our own feelings about like, and it's like, well, we just did it to them. Yeah. You have to expect them to do it back to you. So I made a rule last year, which stands this year. I will get very mad. And like, that's where, this clip, like I struggle with a little bit. One thing I will say, kudos to the umpire for not making it about him and stepping in at any point. Because you see it all the time in colleges, the umpires yelling at the kids, like, go run to first or whatever, or like confronting them as they cross the plate.
Yeah.
But the thing that irked me about that was that when you do it, and this is what I tell my kids, when you do it to the other dugout, you're no longer celebrating yourself and your own accomplishments and your team.
Right.
You are then just putting them down.
Yep.
That is your whole purpose for doing that. So I'm good if you want to do a celly all the time. I want you guys to have fun out there.
Yeah.
Every time I have a kid hit an extra base hit, there's a celebration that happens, whether it's on second or third.
Yeah.
It is always done to our dugout.
Yeah.
They look at our dugout and they do it to us. When they sort a kid, they look at me.
Yeah.
Because there's maybe one or two other kids in the dugout because we have a relatively small roster.
Yeah.
So like they look at our dugout, but they don't look at that batter and sword the batter to the guy's face.
Yeah.
Now, might a batter see that and still be very offended? Mm-hmm. Yes. But I know the intent was to celebrate what we did well and not to trash the other team for not doing the thing well.
Yeah.
And that is the thing that I emphasize most is like, I am good with any cellies you want as long as it's an actual celebration and not I'm better than you and I'm going to put you down.
Yeah.
And that oftentimes is, and like you get in the major leagues, that can be what it is sometimes, right? When there's bad blood. And that was a question that was brought up. Like, I don't know how often these teams are playing each other.
Yeah.
I don't know how many things were said to this guy from the opposing dugout. Yeah. Like, there's a lot of context that we don't know. And in big league games, you have a little bit more idea of that context.
Yeah.
Because it's a little bit more public, where you're like, oh, like there's bad blood in between these teams. So like, yeah, he just, looked at their dugout and sorted their dugout or whatever. And we're about to have an Amir Garrett. Come on, the entire dugout, bring it.
Yeah.
And
that's a real thing,
right?
Like the longitudinal reality of teams that are highly competitive and don't want to lose, but they see each other over and over. That just ratchets up.
Yep. And like, I imagine most pretty competitive select baseball winds up with a similar situation where like we're playing the same teams over and over again.
Yeah.
Like, especially as you get older, there's just not that many teams out there. You're going to have to play the same teams over and over again. And people don't forget. So like you do it once, they're going to remember. And like my dear Jimmy Butler taking a knee and calling the timeout back in Al Horford's face last night after Horford did that, earlier, like people don't forget.
Yeah.
And like, you have to be able to take it as well as you can dish it out. And if you can't dish it out to the other team. You can only celebrate with your own teammates at that point.
Yeah. Which makes sense in terms of like the way that you're framing it, of like about trying to go like, hey, celebrate yourself,
right,
but do it in the right way.
Right.
And it's a tricky thing though for kids who just inherently, they have access to these, and most of the time there isn't a parent overseeing over their shoulder like, hey, how are you taking in this information? How is it making you feel? Danny wasn't even on social media for a long time, and we didn't let him get accounts, but he could still go to YouTube and go to YouTube Shorts.
Sure.
Right. And there's tons of YouTube Shorts accounts that are just like content aggregators. So like he was getting access to social media, even though I wasn't even like allowing him to. It's a really tough. It's a tough thing that I think coaches need to, we talked, I think, again, like the last pod that we did before we brought the kids on about like team management, and getting into the weeds there. And I think some of this stuff really falls under that umbrella where you have to set an expectation for character and how you're going to, I think you can be a good sportsman and still celebrate yourself and your moments of accomplishment. I don't think those two things are mutually exclusive, and I think that's kind of how it has to be, because this kind of, the modern, the boomer take about like, oh, you just need to, we're going to adhere to every single one of baseball's unwritten rules, and any, emotion shown is illegal. Well, first of all, like that's just not the reality of the history of our game at any stage. And second of all, that's not going to make kids want to play the game. Like so we got to like give them some boxes to be like, hey, you can do this thing, but like don't do it in a disrespectful way.
Correct. And like we had an incident, I don't even know if you remember this, but earlier this year, a month ago, probably early April, one of our 14U kids, not on my team, but on one of the other teams, struck out a kid with the bases loaded to end the game, looked at the dugout, grabbed his nuts, at not our dugout, looked at the other team's dugout, grabbed his nuts, or his cup, if you will, and then yelled something and pointed, and was like shuffling off the field from the mound to our third base dugout, all the while pointing and saying something to the other team.
Yeah. I'm
not the coach. I happened to be in the dugout as an assistant coach helping out or whatever. And I was livid. And so kid got back to the dugout and I lit him up.
Yeah.
And it turned out which I couldn't hear, and I did not have the context, but they were the other team was talking all game long.
Yeah.
And like all game long, it did not stop. The kids got frustrated. I am very clear that they can't talk back. Like we let our play do the talking. Like if you want to do a celebration, that's fine to our dugout, but like I'm not going to allow you, if I know about it, to trash talk other players, because that's just like bad sportsmanship.
Yeah.
So they didn't say anything until he struck him out to end the game. I guess they were accusing him of using pine tar because he had a hand warmer, and he kept using the hand warmer on his hands in between pitches because his hands were getting cold. And they claimed he was using pine tar, which is like funny. But he grabbed his nuts and yelled, "Pine tar that," and then was yelling "Pine tar that" as he ran off the field. And like, yeah, getting a little bit more context, I felt bad for immediately yelling at the player. He then immediately said, "I regretted grabbing my nuts," which I was glad he said that, because that was like the one part of that like you definitely shouldn't have done. But like it was much. Yeah, but it was like it was a good conversation.
Yeah.
All of his teammates were like, no, like they had been talking all game. We haven't said anything, and like emotions got the best of him, and he yelled "Pine tar that" or whatever. But that was like a similar situation, right? Where like you don't know the context. There's a lot that goes on. As much as I want to control everything, I don't know what is. I know my first baseman likes to talk to people.
Yes, he does.
Every person who approaches first base, I know, has a conversation with him. God only knows what is spoken about. It would not shock me if some of those times it's not super positive, and not great sportsmanship.
Yeah.
But like same thing can be said about second base and third base. Although those kids are probably not going to say anything. But like we had an incident last year where the shortstop in the other team was hitting our kids in the back.
Man, I forgot about that.
Yeah, it was like standing behind them on like covering on a lead.
Yeah, for anybody
and, like,
that doesn't
hitting them
understand
in the back.
what we're talking about, this shortstop sliding over behind the runner at second base and like literally like
kidney shotting him. Yeah, like kidney shotting him every time he came off the bag to go play his position, and knowing that the home plate ump was calling balls and strikes and not paying attention to that, and the field ump had his back turned.
Yeah.
And it happened for 2 innings before any of my kids said anything. And it was the first thing that got said was, "Coach, can I get ejected for punching this kid in the face?" And I said, "No. Why would you like to?" And then they told me that, and I immediately went out to the ump.
Yeah.
And then it started a thing with the coach and us yelling at each other on the field. But like, I don't know what is said on those bases.
Yeah.
Or like out there. But like all I can control is what is said from my dugout and how we react to things that are said to us.
Yeah.
And we have had one celebration this year where we looked towards the other dugout and I got mad at the kid. Yeah. Every other celebration is you celebrate with your teammates. Like otherwise you're just showing up the other team. You're not celebrating with them. They're not going to celebrate with you.
Yeah. And like I'm fine with that. You know, I'm fine with policing, not showing up the other guy. I in so much as that's a thing in our sport, and it's a thing that we want to hold tight to because we don't want to like full on like WWE culture in baseball or whatever that might even look like. I'm fine with that, but it's when you see these teams with kids that chirp a ton, or they do other stuff like hit the kid in the back of the kidney or whatever, that comes from coaches.
100%.
It comes from coaches. So like for me, when we talk about, improvements to youth baseball, when it comes to like structural things like pitch count and trying to do a better job of understanding workload, I think that's something where it's like speed limits.
Yeah.
Like it's something that has to be imparted on our sport top down, and you have to conform to it. Otherwise there are significant and swift consequences. I think stuff like this, team culture, kids chirping, like looking at the other dugout and intentionally while there can be context that explains some of that stuff, when you see that stuff happening, it's probably not the first time, and it's something that's been permitted or incentivized by those coaches.
And one of the things I noticed, because the other thing I told my team last year is you can't celebrate towards the other dugout. And also, if we're going to celebrate every time we kill it, we also have to give props to them when they do, because they're playing the same game and it's just as hard.
Yep.
And we had a game set. Turn your phone off. Was that the timer?
That's our timer.
Uh-oh.
Finish the story.
In the same game on Saturday that we had, their third baseman made a couple of nice plays.
Mm-hmm. And that last one was great. Yeah.
And my dugout is complimenting him.
Yeah.
On the place. And the look, it was, the first time it happened, it was like, definitely he thought it was sarcastic, and it was like anger a little bit. And then like the second and third time that they were complimenting him on good plays he made, he was like just so taken aback that the other dugout would actually like be like, "Hey, that was like a really nice play, dude." It's like, yeah, we can do both of those things at the same time.
Yeah.
If we're just like celebrating everything as opposed to like getting angry at everything, it's just like a much more fun game to play.
Yeah.
And you can take those. It feels less bad if someone swords you, if they're also, when you make a good play, be like, hey man, that was a really nice play.
Yeah.
And if we had more of that, I think a lot of this stuff wouldn't matter as much.
Yeah. And it doesn't make that kid's spotlight in any way, shape, or form diminished when they do succeed.
Right.
It's just that the spotlight is kind of works this direction, right? Towards our dugout. Right. And
it's a spotlight, not a floodlight.
Yes.
We're not trying to put it on the entire thing where you are.
Yeah.
I want you to look at your teammates.
Yeah.
And celebrate with them.
Yeah.
Because they talk, during practice, they come up with celebrations. Yeah. So you're doing it for each other. You're not doing it for the other team.
Yeah.
So turn to your teammates and do it for them and to them.
Yeah. I mean, they're the only ones that know the history and the context of how long you decided on what your celebration was going to be.
And like a lot of them, if they talk about it in practice, it's like, I hate this team. So if we do something, let's do this.
Yeah.
And like, so they can do that to our dugout knowing, it is a little bit putting down that team. And if you don't do it to their dugout, it's not actually putting them down, which is going to cause much more issues. Yeah.
It's just, this is one of those things where, whether it's the 18U kid or the 16-year-old kid, I think number one, I'm just hard out on like putting a spotlight on kids' bad behavior for clicks. Like I think that just generally sucks. But in terms of like the structure for this stuff, man, it's just you got to have a good coach that's going to give these kids some expectations and some boundaries to stay within about like, hey, I'm not asking you to approach this game like George Brett. Like that's just not going to resonate for a kid in the year of our Lord 2023. And I don't think that the game. And again, I don't think these two things are mutually exclusive, right? Like you can have the spotlight, not the floodlight, on your successes, celebrate that with your teammates, and it doesn't have to go to that other dugout. It really, really doesn't. Danny and I for years, and this is just an indicator again of how old and close to death I am. Like when he does something cool in the box, and I see him out on the field, we do the old Darius Miles, Quentin Richardson thing, because that's a reference that my son gets. Because I'm very old.
He wasn't born, so that's
correct,
all you.
Correct, that's all me. The old Darius Miles Q Rich era, that was fun. And that's the thing, right? Like kids see that stuff because it's fun.
It's fun.
It's fun, and there's the other layer to it, where like you don't know what was said previous, and like we kind of we want like those competition psychopaths in our sport, right? Like there was one of Matt's replies was a guy who had a video of his son, and apparently they were facing a team that had a D1 commit, and the whole team was chirping at him the whole game, chirped on the pitch before because he swung and missed, and then the kid hits a tank, and like he's going to stand there and watch it a little bit. So there is also that element of like, don't start none, won't be none.
Right.
But kids are going to have a hard time, young kids especially, are going to really like understand the ramifications of that. So it's all the more important that you kind of give them, this is again like the Abbott Elementary thing, right? You have to give kids like boxes and expectations for the way that they're going to behave and what plays and what doesn't. And if you don't police that stuff and set expectation of culture and behavior, then you're just like, you're a slave to this thing.
Mm-hmm.
And those kids are going to start exemplifying behavior that they receive video of with no context in a situation that might not be appropriate for it.
Yep.
You got to coach. And you can't just coach the baseball thing. You have to coach behavior, and you have to teach them, like, how do they ride that line of, like, competitive psycho, great sportsman, and not showing up the other team.
Yep. And to put a bow on that, we had, 2 weeks ago, we had a game where a kid in the handshake line afterwards was like, I mean, there's no other way to put it. He was like straight up trying to break people's hands. Yeah. Like not handshaking, punching, like fist bump, but like I'm going to cock back and actually put. And
where'd he learn that from?
Well, where'd he learn that from? One. But like I was very, very proud with the way my team handled that. Yeah. Because they said a lot of things they wanted to do, but didn't do any of them because they knew better than that. and they had been taught and coached better than that.
And had they done those things, they're the ones that are going to end up losing.
Correct.
This is like the NFL thing all the time where like there's a personal, somebody does something, but then the guy that responds is the one that actually gets the flag.
Right.
Yeah.
And they understood that like he did that because he lost.
Yeah.
And he was upset that he lost, and that's why he did that. It has nothing to do with like them. Like it's not personal. He's just not dealing well with a loss and hasn't been coached well. And like that's what's going to that's how that's going to play out.
Yeah, exactly. So we're going to keep this one very brief. The podcast we did, the last one that you and I did was like almost accidentally 2 hours. So we're achieving some balance in the universe by keeping this one brief. It's just, again, you have to provide context and set expectations for behavior of these kids. Otherwise, they're just going to like, this thing is something you gotta control for. You have to control for the data and the information that they take in, and you have to set expectations. And some of that, when you see these teams that are chirping or other wild stuff in the handshake line, yada yada, understand that that's probably coming from a coach or a parent. So, in so much as it matters, as you have an opportunity in youth baseball to raise in the future a child that won't do that type of horse shit, do that.
Yeah, but make sure you don't coach the fun and the passion out of it.
Yeah.
And that's it is a difficult line, but like, it's hard. Take your wins where you get them. If you want to celebrate every little win, there's no problem with that.
Yep.
You just have to celebrate the right way.
And do it in a way that doesn't come at the expense of another child on the field.
Right.
Which I think it's a simple thing you can explain.
Yeah. Is this where we plug the PCA?
Positive Coaching Alliance has a bunch of tools to wrap your head around this idea and how to execute it in a team setting. Youth Baseball Development Certification has a bunch of concepts to like take that and then go the next layer. And then eventually I don't know what we're going to call the book. We got to figure that out. The Hacking Youth Baseball Development book.
Have we asked Gary Paul Thomas?
No, I need to ask Gary Paul Thomas.
Come up with 50 names.
For progressively more ridiculous than the next about what this 200 to 250 page book about everything we believe to be true and accurate in youth baseball. I don't know. We'll figure out what we're going to call it. Short one this time, normal one next time. Thank you guys for the likes, subscribes, all the algorithmic support. We are cruising towards 10,000 listens. We are way over 20,000 on YouTube. So the sum total effect of this podcast is nearing like 40K, which just, man, I appreciate you guys. So do the subscribe thing, do the review thing. We appreciate you. And we'll be back at you next time for, I don't know what. Ooh, Connor Reynolds, Driveline Baseball hitting intern, coming next. We'll see you guys later.